Welcome to the Bright Insight podcast. This is a weekly show provided by Brightside Security Lab. We're talking about updates on security regulations, requirements, and perspectives on the current cybersecurity developments. Security is becoming more widely used and important at home, work, school, or in your personal life. Think about GDPR and the Cybersecurity Act. Cybersecurity is a shared responsibility. The more systems we secure, the more secure we all are. Thank you for listening to Bright Insight.
Hello everyone, my name is Carlos Ratos. Thank you for joining us again in another podcast. Today we have a special guest, Wouter. Welcome, Wouter. Can you please introduce yourself?
Hi, I'm Wouter Slegers. I'm the founder and CEO of TrustCB, one of the bigger CBs in the world.
Okay, thanks, Wouter. For the people who's not familiar with TrustCB, can you introduce TrustCB? What is TrustCB?
And maybe it's good if I start explaining what a certification body is before going into the trust part. So in security evaluations like the ones that Brightside does, there's basically a developer who claims that their product is secure, and then a lab like Brightside tries to break it. But because the developer is paying the lab, there needs to be a third party that oversees the independence and makes sure that all the labs do the same kind of thing. And that's what the certification body does. So in a way, it's a convincing game. The developer convinces you as an evaluator that everything is good, and then you convince the CB that everything is good. And if that's true, then we will issue a certificate that says this thing really does what it says on the tin.
Good. So that's a certification body. And what it makes TrustCB a certification body? And what kind of certificates are we talking here?
Yeah. So there's several answers to that. So in the formal ISO sense, there's a standard 17065, which defines what a certification body is. And essentially is a sort of a advanced ISO 9000 quality system for certification bodies. And there's something similar, 17025 for labs. And that checks whether we have the procedures to maintain our quality, to issue certificates, to withdraw certificates if necessary, and all of those aspects. But that, although that's an important quality part, it doesn't really address the technical capabilities and the know-how that is relevant for the high-end security domain that we're in. So a good certification body in this smart card IoT type domain has a long history in looking at smart cards because those are the high-end security devices in the world. And so our certifiers have a lot of experience in looking at smart card evaluations and knowing is 1.1 million traces on ECC Diffie-Hellman enough, or do you need to have 10 million? So they know how to read the complex reports that you make.
Now you were talking about high-end security domain, but especially in the last couple of years, we have been cooperating quite closely on other domains, in not necessarily the high-end security, but what we call the emerging markets, those markets where we're looking at an increasing need for having evidence of security. And from there, one of those corporations is called SESIP. So let me start with that. Let me start by asking what drives the creation of SESIP, because after all, we already have common criteria and we have some more standards. So let's start with answering that question. Why SESIP?
That is sort of the starting point of SESIP. About 3 years ago, we had this point of, okay, we do all these evaluations with common criteria. And when I'm talking about we, then Brightside and TrustCB. And we optimize these procedures. We make this as smooth as possible, but we still hit some limitations in the use of common criteria. The common criteria defined these evaluation assurance levels, these packages, the EALs, based on what in the 70s was a good idea for a database. And those evaluation assurance levels together, they didn't fit the current situation anymore. But they were nicely numbered. So you have an EAL 1, 2, up to EAL 7, and clearly the higher number is better. So people would always go up. And in a smart card world, we would have EAL 4, for example, as the minimum. And soon there was EAL 5, EAL 6, EAL 7. And in these packages, there's stuff in there that you don't need. There's stuff in there that looked like a good idea in the 70s and the 80s, but now is very painful to do. So one of the things that SESIP did, one of the things we did in SESIP, was to define new packages as the levels that you need to show resistance against an attacker. And if you look at SESIP, you have the SESIP assurance levels, which are SESIP 1 through 5. And these are matching the attacker strength. So at SESIP 5, you have a full smart card level, font 5 attack level. And at SESIP 1, you have is it already known to be broken check. So that it was one of the things that we did. We made the assurance match the efficient processes that we already have in the evaluation and certification business.
One of the questions we get regularly, and I say we because we have been collaborating with you from the very beginning with SESIP, it's around the spirit of SESIP. I will hear things like if SESIP is just for hardware or if it's too much hardware oriented. What is your view on SESIP? What has been the vision of SESIP from the very beginning? Is really focusing on the hardware, or is the approach, or why we have these kind of comments?
We came from a domain of high-end ICs hardware and the smart card domain, and that's the domain we know the best. So all of the examples and the things that we could write up would go to the place that we know the most, which is hardware. And so that is the reason why that part of the standard was the most filled in. But it was explicitly intended for the IoT-like domain by focusing on, let's say, embedded software. So it has a lot of components that will allow an embedded OS, a real-time operating system, or libraries, or an SSL library to be included too. Now, the requirements on such platforms for the software side weren't as clear yet. So in SESIP version 1, the SFRs, the functional requirements for these kind of things, they end up more in the firmware hardware layer. And we're working on generating more of these requirements, like, for example, requirements on user management and roles and user passwords and those kind of things, which are more software things. They'll probably be added as we're going in SESIP 1.1 and further.
And this is something we see reflected on the number of certificates which are public today, right? So we have a number of hardware vendors who already certified their products. The major chip manufacturers are there. But I believe SESIP was not just about certifying products, right? So it was very much about bringing this benefit of the evaluation to the developers of products, what we call showing evidence through a mapping of security requirements from the platform. Can you tell us something about this story about the mapping, how it works, what is done?
Yeah, that's true. So in a way, this is a half product that we're doing with SESIP, where the aim was towards what we would call the platform, the chip, the OS, the libraries, with the idea that somebody could take a platform like that, put their application on top of it, and make a doorbell. or a fridge or some sort of end product. And these end products, they have hundreds of different end requirements, and there are all kinds of local rules or advisories that they need to fulfill. So the mappings take those, what for us looks like external requirements, and says, okay, if you do these things in SESIP, then you fulfill this requirement. So these requirements from 62443, you map to those if you have these SESIP requirements. And the same for all of these other ones. And we call these mappings, we call them mappings. We look at these requirement sets and saying, look, in essence, in core, these SFRs, from these functional requirements from SESIP meet that. And the document that encodes that, and that encodes what you need to do additionally, that's the document we call the mappings.
Has been a great journey working with you. I mean, from the very beginning was just a couple of years ago, really, when
it's only 3 years.
Just 2-3 years.
Not even, yeah.
and a lot happened on the time being. But a lot of things happening right now. So where do you think SESIP is going next? Where do you envision the evolution of SESIP now that it's being adopted by GlobalPlatform, and we have, again, a number of major manufacturers evaluating products with SESIP?
They sometimes say that it's hard to predict the future unless you make it. And in a way, we're doing that. If you see how SESIP went from an idea not even 3 years ago to a global platform standard right now in 3 years. This is IoT speeds. Normally, standards take decades. And what I'm seeing in the near future of SESIP is that we're adding the parts that we need to show compliance to 62443, for example, or the 303, 645, or all of these external type requirements. So we're adding the functional requirements that are in there. We're refining our assurance requirements, our procedures, so that it shows more value to those end usages, so that we address all the details that 62443 needs, for example. So we're having those things. And then we're growing this with SESIP as the universal glue translation layer for these things. Because that is one of the things that we saw, that even though SESIP is very young, we're also seeing that the core is very adapted to the current situation. And we're seeing that the core hasn't changed in 3 years, which is impressive for an IoT standard. So I'm seeing this growing further as the translation to something that we can use and reuse and build upon.
I like the idea. Let's reuse it. Let's make it easier for everyone. Thank you, Wouter. Happy to have you here, and looking forward to the next time. We have plenty of things to talk.
Thank you, Carlos.
Thanks.
Thank you for listening to Bright Insight. In the next episodes, we will cover different topics, such as the EU Cybersecurity Act, the business case of security evaluations, common criteria, SESIP, IoT, and software-based security. Stay tuned and subscribe on brightside.com.